Alright, so let me start off by saying I know that this video is coming a little late. It's taken me a while to put my thoughts together on how to best summarize the first season of Rings of Power. I've heard a lot of conflicting opinions regarding the direction that the showrunners could take Season 2, and now that I've had time to reflect on them, I'd like to share my own thoughts. If I'm being perfectly honest, I went into the Rings of Power knowing that the show would never live up to the books or even the Hobbit trilogy, let alone the Lord of the Rings trilogy that so many people have so much fondness and affection for. What I never expected was to witness the largest waste of $1 billion on what is arguably the most uninteresting and uninspired adaptation of an original story that I have ever seen. Now, to be fair, I'm sure that Amazon tried to get the rights to the Silmarillion, the Unfinished Tales, etc. Lord knows they spent enough money on Rings of Power that I'm convinced that they would have been willing to spend a little more money to have access to the actual works of Tolkien. Maybe it was greed on the part of Tolkien's estate, trying to see if Amazon would make a larger bid for Tolkien's works, or maybe it was just Amazon thinking that they could dump enough money into something vaguely reminiscent of Jackson's trilogy to have instant success. Who knows? I wasn't there, so I'm just kind of spitballing at this point. What we do know is that this show never had a chance from the start. They wanted to use hobbits, but they had to call them Harfoots. They wanted Annatar, but had to rename him as Halbrand, which there's more on that later. They wanted a wizard, but couldn't actually give him a name. They wanted a stronger, more girl boss version of Galadriel and instead created the ultimate Karen. So let's start with the most obvious problem of the show. They chose to feature Galadriel as their lead protagonist, but felt the need to, quote, modernize the character. Rather than rely on her well-established history and focus on her and her husband's journeys throughout the first two ages, they instead rebooted the character as a strong, independent warrior woman that refused to listen to any of the witless men that she encountered along the way. Instead of using her influence and magical powers to impact events throughout the Second Age, she instead girl-bossed her way into places and events that she never actually partook in. Along with this was the all-too-obvious shipping of Sauron and Galadriel. Halbrand, a character completely fabricated by the showrunners, was the non-Tolkienian version of Annatar, a character that Amazon did not have the rights to use. Annatar, who arrived in Eregion 400 years prior to the crafting of the rings, is the alter ego that Sauron used to gain the trust of Celebrimbor, and in doing so, tricked him into helping Sauron to forge the rings. The only mention of Galadriel actually interacting with Annatar was that she was wary of him, and as such, Annatar, or Sauron, tried his best to earn her trust so that his true identity could remain hidden. There was no love story, no Halbrand, no fighting side by side as the show portrayed. That being said, Halbrand wasn't even the worst part of the show. His character was okay, not great, not awful. But standing side by side with Galadriel, you probably found yourself rooting for him and the orcs. I know I did. I mean, let's be honest, they at least try and make the orcs into sympathetic characters, while simultaneously making Galadriel into an abrasive, unlikable bitch. Apparently this is what modernized means. Upon Halbrand finally revealing himself to be the Dark Lord, things take a really weird turn way the hell too fast. Instead of Sauron being an evil, malevolent fallen angel and a servant of Morgoth, he is portrayed as a misguided, love-struck screw-up. Sure, he served the Dark Lord, but he also wants Galadriel's love, and in return he will make her his queen. I know, what the fuck. She of course can't be wooed, and ultimately upon being rejected by her, he takes his place as king of the incels. Take that, patriarchy. What follows is far worse than anything else I'd seen in the show. Upon confronting Sauron and chasing him away, Galadriel then instructs Celebrimbor to make 3 rings instead of 2. He then crafts the 3 Elven Rings of Power without the involvement of Sauron. However, something is extremely wrong with this series of events. In the lore, Annatar helped Celebrimbor to make 16 rings, 9 rings for men and 7 for dwarves, before he was eventually sent away by the elves. In doing this, Sauron would have power over the rings when he would then create his own ring 10 years later. The elves made their rings of power in secret, which is why Sauron's control over them was less effective. Upon returning to Eregion years later, Sauron would kill Celebrimbor and take the 16 rings he helped craft, later gifting them to the dwarves and to men, who would later become the Nazgul. The show fucked up real bad. They not only skipped over Sauron's involvement in the crafting of the original rings, but they then gave Galadriel the credit and the blame for Sauron being involved in the first place. Galadriel is the one that pulled Halbrand from the ocean. Galadriel pushed Halbrand to go back to Middle-earth and become a king. Galadriel took Halbrand to Eregion when he needed healing. None of this was orchestrated by Sauron in secret. Galadriel called every shot. As such, Galadriel is ultimately responsible for every future doom that will follow. She discovers that Sauron is the one that gave them the knowledge to make the rings, and yet she allows the process to continue. This is destruction of canon on a massive scale. I could complain about Galadriel and Halbrand traveling to Numenor, the writers leaving out Elendil's father, Gandalf not Gandalf showing up in the Second Age, the incredibly diverse yet somehow fully Irish Harfoots, so on and so on. But to completely deviate from the timeline that has been established for when the rings were forged on a show called The Rings of Power is completely unforgivable. Looking at what direction they want to try and take the show, I think it's way too late to try and salvage what's left of this bastardized mess that Amazon created. They literally removed Sauron's involvement in making the 16 rings and instead made Galadriel the architect of Middle-earth's doom. Amazon knows that they screwed up. There are so many articles coming out lately talking about how the show will stick to canon for season 2 and that the writers will have to fix Galadriel to make her more humble. They've seen the fan feedback and they know they've got $1 billion mess on their hands. Because Amazon chose to settle for only being able to use the appendices from Return of the King instead of waiting to have the rights to the Silmarillion, they had to completely gut and dismember the very lore that they so proudly claimed they wanted to honor. No man or corporation that truly cared about an original story and claimed to want to honor its memory would ever go into it half-assed, trying to fix things for a modern audience, and then not be willing to commit to whatever it costs to have access to the original source material. This show cannot be fixed. They have destroyed too much to ever repair the damage they have done. Any attempt by the showrunners to try to, in quote, stick to canon in the second season is nothing more than a knee-jerk reaction to the fan backlash. People are tuning out in droves, which is now being backed up by Nielsen numbers and Samba TV, and Amazon is doing all they can to stop the bleeding. But much like being stabbed by a Morgul blade, it'll take more than a simple bandage to heal this wound. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts about Season 2 in the comments down below, and I'll talk to you all real soon.